So we are now in our sheets. We are now Roman numeral 2, letter B, number 5. That's what we're going to talk about. I don't think we've done that before. I think that's what we're up to. We've been talking about the Sabbath, talking about Shabbat. We talked about the positive obligations of Shabbat, that it should be a day of rest, a day of tranquility, a day of holiness. And then we pivoted to talk about the prohibitions of Shabbat and how those prohibitions, the restrictions on work and creative activity of all kinds, carve out a space, carve out a palace in time, a sanctuary in time, where all of those positive things can happen. Right? You need to have quantity time in order to have quality time. And the restrictions on Shabbat are what create that quality time. By not doing creative labor or toil, that's what gives us the space to make the day something special. I would just say, if you speak to, I think, a meticulously observed Shabbat in the Orthodox fashion, I think to somebody who hasn't done it, sounds very onerous and sounds like really, you don't use your phones, you don't drive, you don't turn on a stove, you don't cook, you don't write. It seems very onerous and restrictive and a little overwhelming. I think, in my experience and talking to many, many people, if you try it, it's incredibly easy and enjoyable and really lovely. And there are many people who find living an Orthodox lifestyle and being Jewish to be challenging, and there are people who leave Judaism for all sorts of reasons. I've never met anyone who's ever said, "Well, Shabbat was really the worst. I couldn't handle that. That's why I like it." And no one says that, right? Shabbat is really lovely. It's really a very special thing, but it's like two halves. Like all the positive emerges from the negative. Another story. I met a woman who before I moved here, I lived in. I don't want to give away too many details of someone's private. I don't think. So change some details so that it goes on YouTube. No one's going to figure out who this was. I met somebody who had undergone a conversion to Judaism under non-Orthodox auspices. And then she spent Shabbat here in Lakeview visiting friends of hers. And what she saw was an entire group of peers, say people the same age, all living within, a 10-minute walk of each other's homes, everyone on the same page, on the same schedule, doing the same thing, nobody at any place they had to go or had to be. And so Friday night, long dinner with friends, nobody's looking at their watches and their phones, no one's emailing while they're at dinner, figuring out what they're going to do next. Everyone's just there in the moment, enjoying themselves. They went to lunch, and after they went to lunch, they were going to go take a walk in the park, and they just knocked on a friend's door. Did nothing arranged in advance. Nothing could be arranged in advance, but they knew. Where else would their friend be? No one's going after the movies, no one's shopping, no one's traveling, so they're home. So I'll just knock on their door and see if they're there, and then they'll join us too, and we'll all go to the park, and just that, the ability of she saw the ways in which the laws of Shabbat enabled a certain type of community to function and community living to take place that maybe a generation or two generations ago many Americans knew from their neighborhoods, but which most Americans, most modern people haven't experienced in a very long time. That kind of tight-knit community, the spontaneous, serendipitously running into somebody in the park, on the playground, and knowing that everyone is available to be with community on this day because no one is going out to do something else. So really all the pieces fit together. And she said to me, well, now I want an Orthodox conversion because I want to be part of a community like this. It's important to, Judaism was always important to her, but she realized that she actually wants to practice Judaism among other people who also practice Judaism, because when everyone does it together at the same time, that's what enables this type of community experience to take place. It was a very powerful conversation. It made a big impact on me. And it happened in Lakeview. Okay. So the restrictions on cooking on Shabbat are some of the more complex ones, so we're going to spend a little more time going through them. There's a nice summary that the congregation provides in our quote-unquote community standards guidelines. I don't know if you've seen them. They're on our website. There should be copies refreshed repeatedly on the table outside in the lobby, and they are our guidelines for how to keep kosher and serve food on Shabbat in our community, so that you can offer hospitality and accept hospitality within this community and know what you're getting and what you're, how to do it. Great. Hello. So in those community guidelines, it includes what it means to keep kosher in this community. It also includes how to serve food on Shabbat. Hello. So one of the 39 restrictions of Shabbat, one of the 39 biblical avot melachot, the prime categories of labor on Shabbat is cooking. We define cooking as using, I don't know, how would you define cooking? It's not so simple. Renee?
Well, I think it's like when the food like changes its composition.
Changes its composition?
Well, so like you could have, like, for example, like you could already have a stove on during the whole Shabbat. You didn't turn it on and off, but like if the food is raw and then you put it in and then it converts into, like, I don't want to use the word cooking because it's redundant, but
you shouldn't use the definition of the word you shouldn't use the word itself in the definition. That's cheating. So
right, exactly.
How would you? So okay, anyone want to try to define cooking?
Something you can't eat to something you can eat.
So that means something I can eat raw without a carrot, which I can eat raw or I can eat cooked. So is it impossible to cook a carrot since it's edible while it's raw?
But the process of cooking it, of putting it in the stove,
transforms it. Yeah. So how is it transformed? Using heat. Okay, good. Is it a physical transformation?
These are binding.
Yeah, I don't know. Cooking is the chemical transformation of food through heat. How about that? Okay, using heat to chemically transform food. Okay, which means that boiling water, it's actually not technically cooking. That's a physical, right? The water molecules are not changing when you boil them. They're just they're in liquid form, meaning the molecules are kind of close together, and then when they get with heat, they kind of spread out. But the same molecules are not actually being transformed. So water is like a little bit of a different category. Liquids are a different category. But for solids, cooking is using heat to chemically transform food, and to make it better. Okay. If it makes it worse, that's something else. Okay. That's cooking.
So if the food is not transforming, it's not cooking according to the Jewish law.
Yeah. For example, the way we say this in the medieval rabbinic Hebrew is called ein bishul acher bishul, which means you can't cook something twice. So if I have cold potato kugel and I heat it up and then I have warm potato kugel, I have not chemically transformed it. I have raised the temperature, which is a physical transformation, right? I've added kinetic energy, thermal energy into the potato kugel, but I've not chemically transformed it. That's not cooking. So once something is cooked, it can't be cooked again, which is that's a very important leniency in Jewish law. Okay, you only cook something once because it can only be transformed once through heat. So on Shabbat, That's only for solids. For liquids, there's a leniency that exists for solids. You can only cook them once. That leniency doesn't exist for liquids. I think the reason could be what I just mentioned, that liquids are not chemically transformed. When water boils, it is that transformation in water is a fundamentally different kind of transformation. And you could boil water and it cools down, and you boil it again and it cools down, and you boil it again. And you do that, hundreds of times, and it'll still just be the same water afterwards. Whereas you can't do that to a piece of chicken, right? You can get cold or hot, but it only cooks once. Okay? So on Shabbat, we can't cook anything, nor can we do any action that enhances or promotes cooking. So if you have let's say you have a chicken in the oven, and you open the oven door to see is my chicken done on Friday night to serve to your guests, it's not done. You can't close the oven door. Because closing the oven door enhances the cooking. That's an action of, that's an action of cooking.
So what if you leave it open and then it's still cooking it, but you didn't close it? You know what I'm saying?
Cooking something in the oven with the oven door open. That sounds like a terrible idea, but
right,
I don't think
you cannot turn it off. I don't know.
All right, so we'll talk about how to do it in a minute, but we're not quite there yet. Let's just sort of basic fundamental principles, foundations, okay?
Could you do something so opening the door makes it harder to cook, but you can do that.
Yes.
So you can slow down the process.
Correct. Very good. Yeah, exactly. You can stop. Yeah. If you're serving, let's say you're serving soup. that's on the stove or on a hot plate. You shouldn't do that because by putting your ladle in to serve the soup, you're also stirring up the soup, and as long as it's on the heat, that also promotes and enhances cooking. So anything that enhances cooking could be a violation of this biblical prohibition of cooking something on Shabbat. And likewise, heating liquids on Shabbat is a violation of cooking because liquids, once it cools down, heat it up again, that's an act of cooking. Each time it's a new act of cooking because the water is never chemically transformed through heat. It's only physically transformed through heat. So liquid can be cooked multiple times if it cools down. So any raising the temperature of a cold liquid is cooking. How hot does it have to be? Too hot to leave your hand in. There are different opinions of what that is. This could be a good deal lower than 200 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe even 115, 130. There are different positions, but it's too hot to leave your hand in without pulling it away. If your hand recoils from it, that's good. It's been cooked, okay? If you have some tea, whatever, you put your hand in and it recoils, that tea was cooked, okay? That's a problem. So we can't cook on Shabbat. So everything has to be cooked beforehand. But like all the laws of Shabbat, all of the Shabbat restrictions, we're allowed to set things in motion so that the work gets done on Shabbat automatically. So you can't press olives into oil, for example, once upon a time, but you can put your olives into an olive press and put a big weight on, and over the course of Shabbat, it'll press automatically. Or it'll be a water mill, and the water mill will turn and grind your flour and press your olives, whatever, on Shabbat. That's all fundamentally okay, basically okay, because we have to rest on Shabbat. Our machines don't have to rest. So anything that happens automatically, with some caveats, is fine on Shabbat. So you could put something in the stove before Shabbat starts, and it'll cook automatically on Shabbat. Because what action did you do? I put this on the stove. I put this in the oven. I turned on the fire. And when did I do that? On Friday, before Shabbat starts. So whatever happens on Shabbat, I'm resting, my stove is working. That's fine. That's fine. Vis-a-vis this biblical prohibition of cooking. However, there are rabbinic restrictions that were added on, and that makes things much more complicated. The rabbinic restrictions, really two of them that are most germane. The first is called shehiyah. They're both fundamentally, basically, avoiding doing things that look like we're cooking, and also avoiding the possibility that we might come to cook or stoke the fire. Remember, in ancient times, ovens were fed by wood, and if something wasn't cooking fast enough, you would take a stick and you would poke the fire to get the fire going again. And that's a biblical violation of lighting, corroding fire, encouraging burning, exactly. So the rabbis were concerned that people would be impatient. You have a room full of guests waiting in the next room. I have a half-raw chicken on my pot, in my oven, whatever. I'm going to stoke the fire to make it cook sooner. And so the rabbi said, not only can you not cook on Shabbat, you can't leave something in an oven or on a stove when Shabbat begins, unless it is fully cooked. Or unless you cover and block access to the embers.
That's shehiyah?
That's called shehiyah. S-H-E-H-I-Y-A-H. In ancient times, that was done by raking away the coals. You could rake away the coals and then put the chicken in the oven, and it'll cook on its own on Shabbat. In modern times, that's done by maybe covering your oven knobs, or not putting something on not having the pot on a burner, but having the pot on a plata or a hot plate, something indirect, so that you're not going to be tempted to stoke the fire. If it's fully cooked, that's okay. Your chicken soup is fully cooked. It can be on the burner when Shabbat begins, bubbling away, and you just have to take it off the burner or off the heat or out of the oven or whatever to serve it to your guests, so you're not stirring the ladle while it's still on the fire. But there's no issue of shehiyah because it's already fully cooked. It's only if it's not fully cooked that we're worried, what if you're going to stoke the coals in ancient times, and in modern times, what if they're going to turn up the oven? And so we have to have some sort of barrier to prevent that from happening. Okay, that's shehiyah. Yes, questions?
Does fully cooked mean edible, or meaning there's no more chemical transformation?
That's a great question. There are a couple of different positions of what fully cooked could mean. The most lenient would be it's not. The Talmud says cooked sufficiently that if you were a highwayman who was like eating out in the woods, running from authorities, and you only had a little bit of time to cook your chicken, and you're not going to wait till it's fully cooked, you'll just grab and eat it. Like that might be sufficient. Or it might be it's so fully cooked that any additional cooking will make it worse. Every extra minute I leave it in the oven, it'll be worse. It seems we take a more moderate approach. Say it's fully cooked is like, I'm ready to eat it now. If I'm ready to eat it now, I can leave it on the fire and not worry about it. Even if it won't burn, even if it won't necessarily get worse by leaving it on. Like you have something like, let's say you have like a stew, a chulent. So the chulent can be fully cooked after 10 hours, but after 15 hours, the bones will get really, really soft and gelatinous and even better. So, right? Some people like the chicken bones, let's say, they kind of dissolve away, and that's like peak chulent, okay? So you don't have to wait to that point, okay? It's enough if you, stop it at, hey, it's fully cooked, it's done, I'm done now, even though an additional time will make it even better. Yes?
So what if you put it in an oven when it's raw before Shabbat, and you time the oven, so like you will continue cooking during Shabbat? You said that's fine, right?
So you'd have to have some way of covering the knobs, so some equivalent of what the Gemara and the Talmud is called. You've raked away the coals and covered them, so maybe it means you have your oven knobs are covered, or there's some barrier to prevent any adjustment, and then it could do the cooking on Shabbat itself. As it turns out, if it's really, really raw, that might also be a leniency. Because if you throw a raw piece of meat in your stew on Friday afternoon, right when Shabbat's about to start, what are you saying? You're basically saying, oh, this is for lunch, not for dinner. And so we're not worried you're going to be tempted to stoke the coals because you just threw a raw piece of meat in. So we're like not, you're signaling that this is not for dinner, I feel no pressure about time whatsoever. I just threw a raw piece of meat in. So if it's fully raw, then it'll also be lenient. And if it's fully cooked, that's also lenient because you're not going to be tempted to stoke the coals. It's that in between where we're concerned. So, yes?
So it's okay if it's fully raw, just because the intention is not to eat it for dinner?
Correct. In terms of ovens, with time, I once was at a house with an oven. This was a company that went bankrupt in the financial collapse of 2008. They made ovens that were combined ovens and refrigerators with like real space age, like space shuttle insulation material to like make this work. So you could put a raw chicken in and it would refrigerate it, and then it would cook it, and then refrigerate it again, and you would have like a raw chicken, and then you'd go away, you'd come back, you'd have like like a roasted chicken like in your refrigerator done already. Like a very small market for this, incredibly expensive oven, but it was a pretty cool idea. Like had really great Shabbat, implications.
Maybe when we have robots, we won't have to worry about anything during Shabbat. Right?
It's a question. I'll offer a tangent. I mentioned already that essentially, according to the Talmud, according to Mishnah, we have to rest on Shabbat. Our tools do not have to rest on Shabbat, and so you can have water mills, and you can have, whatever automatic things existed. Load up everything in the oil press and put some weight on it, and just, or put cloth in a big vat of dye, and you just leave it there over the weekend, and you come back and you have, green wool or whatever it is. And over the centuries, there were other devices where you could light a fuse on Friday, and it would burn a really, really long fuse, and Shabbos morning would make you a cup of coffee. Okay, devices like this existed. In the 20th century, electric timers were invented and became popular, and people started using them for controlling the lights in their home. And this became widespread by the 1950s. It was common in American Orthodox homes to have timers turning lights on and off. And then the question was, well, can we use timers for other things? Why not a dishwasher? What about a radio? Okay, what about TV? Moshe Feinstein in the 50s says, I really don't like these timers. If these existed in the time of the Talmud, they would have prohibited it. It's really not that much different. It's forbidden. You can't ask someone non-Jewish to do work for you on Shabbat. You can't. So too, you shouldn't be able to set up a timer. And he says, with these timers, you can have factories running, you can have like industry operating, and Shabbat will be lost because we'll have everything just being done on timers, and the day will be just a regular workday with industry and for commerce and everything just operating automatically. And so he says, Asur lahatir, it's forbidden to permit this, which is a very strange locution because he knows it's fundamentally okay, but he sees this as a major, major threat to the survival of the spirit of Shabbat and the institution of Shabbat. And so he says, keep your timers for your lights, because that's already widespread, but nothing other than lights.
So you can do that for your oven, right? Because having your computer right now, you could technically program things so that from the hours of 9 to 10 a.m. your oven turns on.
Yeah, so I think in fact with Moshe, even despite that, I think in fact what's emerged in the generation since that time is we've just had to use discretion in what we feel it's appropriate to use timers for. So using a timer for television or radio, that I believe would ruin the experience of Shabbat, like not being immersed in that in media for not being implicated in electronics for one day. That defines Shabbat as a restful, tranquil, holy day, whereas my dishwasher goes on, like that's just convenient, or I have a hot plate on a timer. That just means that I don't use as much electricity and my kitchen's a little safer. I don't have like hot things that kids could touch, etc. So we use timers, but we use them with discretion. That's sort of how things have emerged.
So with a hot plate and timer, because is it okay?
Yes. And I have a coffee maker. My coffee maker's on it. My coffee maker's a timer. It makes a pot of coffee Shabbos morning, and it's great. So that's shehiyah. Shehiyah is a prohibition against leaving things in the oven or on the direct heat that aren't fully cooked or that aren't raw, lest you stoke the embers, which means lest you turn up the heat. Okay. So to avoid that, either we have things fully cooked before Shabbat begins, or fully raw, or we don't put the pot on the burner. We put the pot on a piece of metal that covers the flames. We can't see the flame. We don't have access to the flame. That's a reminder. It's called a blech, and the piece of metal goes over your stove, and that's a way you don't see the fire. It means that it's not directly on the fire. You're not going to be tempted to stoke the fire. If you don't stoke, it's still a reminder that this is different. Or you have a blech, a sheet of metal that then comes down and covers your knobs, or you tape your knobs. Just a reminder, I'm not going to turn the knobs. Just a reminder that this is inaccessible at Shabbat today. The other very relevant rabbinic prohibition is called chazara, which is returning something to the heat once it's been removed from the heat. We don't put something back on, back in the oven or back on the stove once it's come out of the oven or off of the stove, unless it is, our intention was to return it right away. We didn't put it down and it remained hot. Probably it's okay if we put it down for a minute or two if our intention was to put it back. So you take your chicken off your hot plate. You bring it to the table. You serve a leg. You serve a wing. Okay. Then you're going to put it back on the hot plate so it stays warm in case 20 minutes later somebody wants seconds. That's okay. But you can't put it down on the table, leave it there for 30 minutes, and then you're like, oh, you know what? Billy's going to come home a little bit late. He's going to want hot chicken too, and put it back on the hot plate. That you can't do. Once it's off, it stays off. Once something comes out of the oven, it can't go back in the oven. It comes off the stove, comes off the hot plate, can't go back on the hot plate, can't go back on the plata. This means that you can't take... Oh, sorry, you have a question?
Yeah, sorry.
No,
Does this only apply to things that are cooking when Shabbat starts?
This applies to anything.
So like, for example, like if we have challah, which we warm it up in the oven then, like for Shabbat lunch?
No. Nor could you take, for example, let's say, a casserole, potato kugel, a chicken out of your refrigerator on Shabbat morning and heat it for your lunch by putting it in an oven or putting it on your stove.
But could you put the challah, like, if you have like a challah cooking in?
Yes. Okay. So you can't. Chazara means you can't take something out of your refrigerator Shabbos morning and put it on your blech, okay, or on your stove or in your oven. You can't, even if it's already cooked. It's already cooked. You're not violating the biblical prohibition of cooking, okay? You didn't leave it there, so it's not an issue of shehiyah. It's an issue of chazara, returning something to the heat after it's been removed, okay, out of your refrigerator Shabbos morning because for heating up for lunch, or back onto the heat in the middle of dinner because you want to be warm for second servings. However, there are a couple of leniencies that override, and the concern is it looks too much like cooking. take something cold and you put it on your stove. That looks like cooking, we don't do that. And maybe it's also a concern of, again, I'm going to stoke the fire to make it get warm faster. But there are two leniencies around that prohibition. One is you are allowed to put it not on the fire, not on the heat, but on something which is itself cooking. So if you have your chillant bubbling in a crock pot, you can put your challah on top of the crock pot to warm. If you have a big hot water urn that is keeping a vat of water warm, you can put something on top of that to warm. In fact, my cousins in Jerusalem, they have a large metal hot water urn that's designed to go on top of the stove, keep a little fire on, so you have your big thing of water hot for tea, and it's metal and has a flat top. So you can put all your chicken and your kugels and your challahs on top of it, and that's fine. Because that's not a way people cook. People don't normally cook that way. And so that's fine. Another thing that's fine, and this is what we do in our home, and this is what most of us do, I think, in our community, and I recommend, is to use an electric hot plate, which is never used for cooking, and isn't designed for cooking, and can't really be used for cooking because it has no knobs and doesn't really get quite hot enough. A warming tray, okay? An electric warming tray is not something you can use for cooking really easily. And so you can take something out of the refrigerator Shabbos morning and put it on the warming tray, and then an hour later, 30 minutes later, you have hot food for lunch. Because the warming tray doesn't look like cooking, can't be used for cooking, you're not going to be tempted to stoke the fire, there is no fire, you're not going to be tempted to turn the knob, there is no knob, and again, it doesn't look like cooking. So warming trays are fine, but that's only so far as you aren't violating the biblical prohibition against cooking, which would be by putting something liquid onto the warming tray. Put liquid on the warming tray, liquid, that leniency if you can't cook something twice doesn't apply to liquid, and so you take your soup out of the refrigerator on Shabbos morning and put it on the warming tray. As soon as that soup gets hot, that soup is cooked, so you can't do that. So hot soup is most likely something that we serve Friday night, not really something we can serve Saturday for lunch.
You cannot reheat them. A soup.
Not be reheated, you cannot reheat a soup, correct. Okay, what are your questions? Yeah?
So can you have it on the warming tray, can you take it off the warming tray and put it back on the warming tray?
Yes. Yes, good question.
So it's soup.
Yeah?
When are you considering it really liquid? Let's say if it's chicken soup, there's
Good
lots
question.
of chicken, lots of stuff inside. So
It's a very good question. It's a very good question. The definition of liquid versus solid is not so simple. Because what if something is a solid when it's in the refrigerator and becomes a liquid after you heat it? That seems to be fine. Because what you're heating is you have a roast chicken in a casserole tray, and it has some congealed fat and stuff at the bottom. When you take it out of the refrigerator, it's like solid. But when you put it on the warming tray an hour later, the chicken's sitting in juice and stew. That seems to be, as gravy, that seems to be fine. Meatballs and sauce, iffy. Okay? So that doesn't have to be like popcorn dry to be put on the warming tray, but it should be basically a solid with some moisture, attendant moisture, rather than something in juices. Something in juices, serve it Friday night. Because Friday night, you just have it on your warming tray before Shabbat begins, and then you're fine. You don't have to worry about it. Whew. Other questions about serving hot food on Shabbat?
Can you put a timer on your hot plate?
Yes.
Can the timer turn it off and on?
Yes. So it can be on for a couple hours Friday afternoon, goes on again to heat your lunch, goes on again Saturday afternoon to heat your dinner. Yeah.
So rice can be reheated.
Yes. Anything else? Okay. One more thing to talk about in this topic, and that's tea. Okay. The Talmud distinguishes. So what could be the problem with tea? Let's just think this through. Sifting can be a problem if you pull the tea bag out of the tea. Leave the tea bag in, that's not a problem with sifting. Cooking, what are you cooking? The leaves. Okay. So the Talmud says that things can only be cooked in what the Talmud calls kli rishon, which in English is a primary vessel. The primary vessel is the thing that was on the heat itself. Pot on the fire, that's your primary vessel. You put something in that, it will cook. You take your contents of the primary vessel and you pour it into something else. Now it's a secondary vessel. And the Talmud says a secondary vessel can't cook. Pot of boiling water, take it off the fire, pour it into another pot, put a potato in it, it won't cook. Because all of the, one possible reason is that all of the energy that would have cooked the potato is now going to heating the walls of the pot. Okay, you have boiling water poured into a cold pot that's no longer on the stove. It's going to have to heat the walls of the pot. The walls of the pot are going to absorb some of that heat, and so there won't be enough energy to cook something inside that pot. So you can try this if you want to do an experiment, see how it works, okay, under what conditions it works, but that's the Talmud's assumption. However, there is a possibility that some things might be especially sensitive to heat and might cook even in a cliche, even in a secondary vessel. And there's a concern that maybe tea is like that. Certainly the flavor from the tea is going into the water. The leaves seem to be somewhat changed, maybe. Certainly softer after they've been, the water's been in them. And so there's some who are concerned that even in a secondary vessel you could not put, you might violate the prohibition of cooking. That would mean that if you, let alone take say a kettle on your stove over the course of Shabbat, you couldn't take that and pour that over tea. That would be primary vessel, that might be cooking. But you could put it into a cup and then put the tea into that cup, that would be secondary. That would be fine, except maybe we're worried that tea is going to be cooked even in a secondary vessel, so some people pour it into a third cup. So from the kettle into a cup, from that cup into a third cup, and you put your tea bag into that. But Moshe Feinstein endorsed that method of making tea. Others are strict even about, because he sort of made up that category, third cup, that's like a thing he invented. Others say, no, the way to have tea on Shabbat is to make, on Friday, a tea concentrate, like an essence of tea, and to dilute that in hot water on Shabbat, and in that way, you don't have to worry. So that's the method that is sort of endorsed by others. So those are two methods of making tea.
Could that be done by clear the shop? Having this
the concentrate. I
Use 3 downstairs.
yes, that's because there's a question. I don't think it's necessary. I mean, I wrote that, and I think I was stricter than I need to be. I think Kli Rishon it can't be. I think that has to be a cliche.
It's possible, or it has to be.
I think at least cliche. I believe.
And what about, sometimes you have actually at Uncle, whatever the tea is, you can buy a teapot, and inside of it is this metal mesh. You put the tea leaves, the loose tea leaves inside, so does it have to be cliche that you pour inside, cliche?
That would be the same as, it's no different than a tea bag, it's just bigger. So I would, if you're going to make a pot of tea on Shabbat, I would put from your hot water urn, pour it into a little teapot. From the teapot, pour it into your infuser, whatever you call it, and then put the tea inside. Yeah.
I have a tangential question.
Okay.
You can tell me if you want to talk about it later.
Okay, ask the question and we'll see, yeah.
I was reading something about like meat and dairy being able to use the 3 vessels in a similar way.
Yeah, exactly.
How does that work?
Because this is
Or
very
like,
good.
what's an example?
Yeah, so that's a great example. The same rule, anytime cooking is relevant in Jewish law, these same rules apply. Cooking only takes place in a primary vessel. It doesn't take place in a secondary vessel. So cooking is a relevant category in the laws of Shabbat. Cooking is also a relevant category in not cooking meat and dairy together. So if you have you take your chicken soup that's boiling in a big pot in the stove, you take it out of the label and put it in your bowl that's on the table. Your bowl is a secondary vessel. It might even be tertiary if it was in the ladle for enough time. Maybe it's a tertiary. That means that if a piece of cheese falls into your chicken soup, cooking has not happened. You can take the cheese out and your soup is kosher, assuming you get all the cheese out, okay? And if you did it on purpose, you wouldn't have violated the biblical prohibition of cooking dairy
Does it
together.
make your bowl a meat bowl? Or like, is that a
Oh, it would not make the bowl a meat bowl. If the bowl only has secondary, is that true? That I'm not sure. That's a great question, which I should know the answer, and once upon a time, very recently, I knew the answer. I'm not positive. There we might say that if it's just hot enough for your hand to recoil, then it's absorbed into the walls of the, I think we do say that, into the walls of the bowl. But well, maybe not. Maybe we don't say that. Maybe we say, Which is why, you know, after the fact, we're much more lenient about plates and stuff like that, because most plates are not really used for primary. You cook something in a pot, in a casserole, in a pan, and then it goes on your plate. It's really never used for, I mean, something that's on the wrong kind of plate, you make a mistake with the plate, it's probably not going to be a major mistake. I'm going to double check that. Barris, this is on the, everyone watching the video will know that I can't remember if we say that the taste is absorbed in heat or if it requires primary vessels as well. It's embarrassing. But it is true that we are concerned about vessels in the case like with the soup. That would be a case where it would make a difference. Okay, let's pause here. This is very complicated. On your way out or at your leisure, check the shul website. You can see there's a sign on the website that says, I think it's a random place. It's called, I think, Orthodox in Lakeview is the tab, and it has community standards, guidelines to kashrut and etc. and serving Shabbat meals, hosting Shabbat meals in our community, and you will see hopefully a very clear summary of all that we discussed this evening. And if you have any further questions, we'll talk about it later. Next time we meet, let's see, the holidays are coming. This is going to be a challenge. I think Labor Day is it's not going to be a good time to meet. I think folks are away, so let's not do that. And then the next Monday is Rosh Hashanah, Monday the 17th. Does that work? Monday the 17th. Let's meet Monday the 17th at, oh no, you know what, there might be Monday the 17th, let's do that, okay? Let's do 8 o'clock back here again, all right?
Yes, sir.